There is a moment, silent, invisible, where power slips from your hands. It doesn't happen when you fail. It doesn't happen when you're attacked. It happens when you say these words, "Let me explain." In that instant, whether you realize it or not, you've just surrendered your authority. You've placed yourself below the other person. You've made their misunderstanding your problem. You've abandoned power and stepped into the weakest position possible, defensive justification. Machiavelli understood this psychological trap long before modern manipulators ever gave it a name. Because once you explain yourself, you're no longer controlling perception. You're reacting to it. And Machiavelli's golden rule of power was simple. Never allow perception to be dictated by the crowd. Control it or be consumed by it. Let's break this down to its cold truth. People do not believe the truth. They believe what they perceive. And once you start trying to correct their perception, you're admitting it holds weight. You're saying, "You misunderstood me, and that misunderstanding matters more than what I've done." You're saying, "Your interpretation has the power to define me." And just like that, you give your enemies the greatest weapon of all, the ability to frame your identity. Machiavelli saw this happen in courts, in councils, in war rooms. Princes would try to justify their failures, clarify their positions, or explain their intentions, and with every word their strength would bleed out like a silent wound. Not because what they said was false, but because their need to say it revealed something fatal. They were worried about being misunderstood, but powerful men do not fear being misunderstood. They use it. Let that sink in. The need to be understood is an emotional craving, and in Machiavellian strategy, emotion is weakness. The man who cannot tolerate being misread will spend his life correcting rumors, while the man who ignores them writes history. Now look at yourself. How many times have you tried to explain why you didn't reply fast, why you chose that path, why you said what you said, or why you walked away from something? You probably thought you were being clear. You thought you were setting the record straight. But in reality, you were chasing a leash tied to someone else's approval. You were negotiating your value. And once you do that, Machiavelli would say you no longer have any. Power is not explained. It is sensed. And it is feared because it never asks to be understood. So how did Machiavelli flip the game? When accusations were thrown at him, he didn't respond with explanations. He responded with silence or with results. And both were lethal. Someone would say, "He's manipulating the Duke." He wouldn't write a letter defending himself. Instead, he'd secure a promotion. They'd whisper, "He's a traitor to the Republic." He wouldn't give a speech. He'd write the prince and make them study his name for the next 500 years. Because explanation is temporary, but power moves are permanent. Let's take this deeper. The act of explaining always carries an unintended signal. You care what they think. You need to be seen a certain way. You require your name to be cleaned. That signal, once detected, will be exploited. Now they know how to manipulate you, by threatening your image. They don't even have to discredit you with facts. They just have to imply you're something negative, and they know you'll jump into the trap. They just need to say things like, "That's not what I heard. That's not how it looked to me," or "People are saying," and boom, now you're explaining, clarifying, defending. And the moment you do that, you're not leading anymore, you're performing. Machiavelli didn't perform. He postured, he projected, and when necessary, he disappeared. Because mystery is stronger than any justification. Let me show you something even darker. If someone asks you a question with judgment in their tone, and you explain yourself, you've given them authority. If someone misquotes you, and you rush to fix it, you've centered them. If someone spreads a rumor, and you respond emotionally, you've validated their reach. Because now you're confirming that their words mattered enough to provoke a reaction. And that is exactly what Machiavelli warned about. You can never let the perception of others become the battlefield. Because once you're fighting there, you're no longer using strategy, you're using emotion. You're reactive, you're visible, you're touchable. So what should you do instead? Here is Machiavelli's brutal rule of perception control. Never explain. Redirect, reframe, or silence. But never explain. Someone accuses you of betrayal? Don't say, "I was loyal." Say, "I did what was necessary." Someone says you've changed? Don't say, "I haven't." Say, "I evolved." Some people don't. Someone says you were wrong? Don't say, "Here's why I was right." Say, "We'll see," and then walk away. Let the silence hum like a threat. When you explain, you are begging. When you declare, you are commanding. See the difference? Machiavelli's power came not from his charm, but from his willingness to be seen as cold, dangerous, or even villainous if it meant preserving control. He didn't fear a dirty image. He feared being seen begging for a clean one. Because once the crowd knows you're desperate to explain, they will never stop demanding explanations. And once you play that game, you will lose yourself trying to win them back. But if you stay silent, if you keep your posture high, your voice low, your presence unbothered, they'll start explaining you to each other. And that is true power. Because when they can't read you, they start fearing you. When they can't predict you, they start respecting you. When they can't control how you're seen, they either fall in line or fall away. And Machiavelli would tell you that both outcomes are perfect, because you were never here to be understood. You were here to be obeyed. Machiavelli understood something that still terrifies the average man to this day. Your silence is more powerful than your explanation. Because silence is not the absence of a response. It's a strategy, a message, a weapon. And in a world addicted to clarification, silence makes people feel uncertain. That uncertainty triggers anxiety, and that anxiety turns into respect. But when you explain yourself, you eliminate that uncertainty. You relieve their tension. And you think you're helping yourself, but what you're really doing is lowering yourself to their level of understanding. Machiavelli would never explain. Not because he was stubborn, but because he knew that the person who holds the narrative never chases it. Let me paint this clearly. Explaining yourself says to the world, I want to be seen a certain way. And the moment you want to be seen a certain way, you're now controllable. You'll avoid actions that could be misinterpreted. You'll soften your words to prevent being judged. You'll hesitate to make power moves if they look selfish or cold. You will live your life through the eyes of others. And Machiavelli would tell you that's slavery with better clothes. Now let's zoom in on the battlefield of perception. When someone attacks your image, especially in front of others, your instinct is to clear things up. Big mistake. Because when you respond, the room learns something, not about the truth, but about you. They learn you're vulnerable to public pressure. They learn you value their interpretation more than your own direction. They learn that they can provoke you into explaining your authority instead of asserting it. And in power games, the man who explains his authority doesn't have any. You don't tell people you're powerful. You act like it. You move like it. You decide like it. And if that power is questioned, you don't argue. You let the consequences of underestimating you do the talking. This is where Machiavelli shined. His rule wasn't to be aggressive. It wasn't to be loud. It was far colder. Be unreadable. Make your motives opaque. Let your actions speak confusion into your enemies' minds. Let's say someone accuses you of arrogance. The weak man explains. He says things like, I'm not arrogant, I just know what I want. You misunderstood what I meant. Or, I didn't mean to come off that way. Sounds fair, right? But here's the reality. Every word you say confirms their frame. You've accepted their premise that arrogance is bad and you need to justify yourself. You've let them dictate the conversation. But Machiavelli wouldn't even acknowledge the accusation. He might smirk. He might say, you think so? And walk off. Or worse, he'd simply deliver the result that proves his authority beyond any opinion. Because here's the secret. The more powerful you are, the more people need to misunderstand you. They need to label you so they can sleep at night. They need to say, he's cold. He's lucky. He's too harsh, because the alternative is terrifying, that you are simply better than them at navigating the world. Machiavelli weaponized this misunderstanding. He understood that people fear what they cannot define. And if you keep explaining yourself, you become defined. You become a known quantity. You become safe, predictable. And predictability is death in the arena of power. The man who can be read clearly is the man who can be countered. But the man who smiles in silence, who doesn't correct your assumptions, who lets people fill in the blanks with fear or admiration, that man is playing a different game, a higher one, because he doesn't care what story is told about him. He controls the ending. Let me give you a real-world breakdown. You're in a business negotiation. They question your pricing. They imply you're greedy. They try to bait you with questions like, why are your rates so high? Or, why do you think you're worth that? You explain. You say, well, because I've worked hard and I provide this much value and I really care about results. No, stop. Machiavelli would cut you off and whisper, if you must explain your worth, you've already devalued it. Instead, You look them in the eye and say, "You're free to go elsewhere." That one sentence does more than your 5-minute explanation ever could. It says, "I don't chase deals. I don't argue my value. I don't need to be liked. I walk, with or without your approval." Now that is dominance. That is perception control. Because the highest level of power is when people begin explaining you to each other, trying to understand your confidence, your silence, your detachment. They start saying things like, "He's hard to read. I don't know what he's thinking. I can't tell if he likes me or not. And there's something about him that makes me second guess myself." You want that. You want to be the one in the room whose image isn't shaped by your words, but by your unapologetic stillness. Now let's close with a principle Machiavelli would engrave into stone. Every time you explain, you confirm that someone else's misunderstanding has more power than your presence. That's the brutal truth. So what do you do instead of explaining? You state. You execute. You observe. You let silence dig deeper than any sentence ever could. Let them think you're cold. Let them think you're arrogant. Let them say you've changed. Let them call you what they need to call you to feel comfortable. But never give them the luxury of watching you explain yourself. Because the man who can't walk away without defending his image never owned it in the first place. Machiavelli didn't just understand perception, he commanded it. And now, so will you. The world is filled with performers, people desperate to be seen correctly. They tweak their tone, sugarcoat their intent, over-clarify their choices. Why? Because they believe the right explanation will earn them the right treatment. But Machiavelli would laugh at this naivety. Because in the real game of power, explanations don't change how people treat you. Only leverage does. And every time you explain yourself, you're signaling that you have no leverage, only hope. Hope that you'll be given the benefit of the doubt. Hope that they'll see your side. Hope that the misunderstanding will be fixed. But here's the brutal truth. If you need to be understood to be respected, you're already at the mercy of others. And Machiavelli's golden rule was never to depend on mercy. Depend on perception. Control it. Twist it. Weaponize it. But never react to it. Let's take this to the psychological core. Why do people explain themselves? Not because they're noble, not because they want fairness, but because they fear rejection. Explanation is fear wearing a rational face. It's the inner voice that says, "Please don't misunderstand me. Please don't dislike me. Please don't walk away." But power does not beg. Power does not ask to be liked. Power says, "Believe what you want. I move either way." This is why the most dangerous man in any room is the one who never scrambles to be read correctly. He lets misperceptions grow and then turns them into mirrors. Because when someone assumes the worst of you and you don't correct them, they start to question their assumption. Not because you told them they were wrong, but because you acted like their opinion was so beneath you, it didn't deserve a response. And that makes people do something you can't fake. They start rethinking your value. That's the Machiavellian advantage. When they attack and you remain calm, when they accuse and you remain unfazed, when they misinterpret and you do nothing, they begin to wonder if maybe they missed something. That doubt, that hesitation, that silent internal correction, it's worth more than your explanation, because they're doing it to themselves, and that's how control is cemented. Let me show you this from another angle. Imagine you're criticized in front of a group. You're misrepresented, maybe even insulted. Now the group watches you. Do you explain? Do you defend? Do you say, "Let me set the record straight"? No. Machiavelli would stand still. He would let the room sit in discomfort, because silence forces everyone else to make a decision. They wonder, was the accusation true? Why isn't he responding? Is he planning something? Maybe he doesn't even care what we think. In that silence, the accuser loses control. They wanted attention. They wanted dominance. But now all eyes are on you, and your silence has turned into a kind of power vacuum, one that pulls the room toward your energy, not theirs. That's not passive. That's precision. Because when you say nothing, your image becomes limitless. It cannot be pinned down, cannot be cornered, cannot be controlled. People start talking in circles trying to define you. Maybe he's just cold. No, maybe he's playing 3D chess. Or maybe he just doesn't care. Exactly. You are no longer a man they explain to others. You are now a mystery they explain to themselves. Now let's destroy another illusion, that if you don't explain yourself, you'll lose your reputation. This is a lie fed to weak men by systems that want them compliant. Your reputation is not made from words. It's made from presence, pattern, and results. Let people think you're harsh. Let them think you're arrogant. Let them assume you're something you're not. Then win, then build, then execute, then outperform everyone silently. Because when your work outshines their words, their narrative collapses under your momentum. That's what Machiavelli taught, not to manage opinion, but to render it irrelevant. Let's go further. In modern times, people are constantly asked to explain why they set boundaries, why they said no, why they left the group, why they raised their prices, why they didn't reply, or why they weren't nicer. You know what all those questions have in common? They come from people who feel entitled to your behavior. And if you explain yourself, you're saying, yes, you're owed an answer, but you're not. And if they think you are, that's a them problem, not a you responsibility. Machiavelli would not apologize for moving differently. He would not slow down to educate the offended. He would not break his momentum to babysit the insecure. He would keep moving and let the consequences of your absence be the only explanation they ever get. You want to live like this? Then burn this into your operating system. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be understood. You need to be unshakable. Every time someone demands an explanation, ask yourself, will this make me more respected? Will this make me more feared? Will this make me harder to replace? If the answer is no, stay silent. Or worse, respond with something unreadable. Say, you'll understand eventually. Believe what you need to, or the results will speak. That way, you don't just protect your power. You amplify it. You reinforce it. You burn it into the atmosphere around you like heat, felt but never seen. Because when people can't figure you out, they don't know how to attack you. When they don't know how to attack you, they hesitate. And when they hesitate, you win. That's the Machiavellian law of perception control. Never explain your moves, make them undeniable. Now we get to the apex of Machiavelli's brutal genius, the point where explaining yourself doesn't just make you look weak. It proves to everyone watching that you're no longer in control of your own image. Because once you start explaining yourself, you've already stepped into a frame that someone else designed. And the first rule of power is simple. Never play inside someone else's frame. This is why powerful people, real power, not pretend power, don't defend themselves. They don't explain their decisions. They don't rush to patch misunderstandings. Not because they don't care about truth, but because they understand something deeper. The person who defines the terms of the conversation owns the conversation. When you explain yourself, you're not speaking from power. You're answering to someone else's assumption. You're trapped inside their narrative. And no matter how articulate, calm, or rational you sound, your very response confirms the most dangerous message of all. They got under your skin. And once people know they can pull you into reaction, they'll keep doing it. They'll bait you again, twist your words again, force you to clarify again. And every time, your power bleeds out a little more. Machiavelli would never play that game. He didn't explain. He reframed. He'd turn an accusation into a declaration, turn judgment into misdirection, turn gossip into elevation. If someone said, "You betrayed them," Machiavelli would say, "I protected the state." If someone said, "You manipulated the court," he'd answer, "I secured peace." He didn't argue morality, he argued outcome. Because morality is subjective, but results are undeniable. This is why he warned rulers to avoid being seen as good if that image made them predictable. It's not about being cruel. It's about being beyond reach, too strategic to be categorized, too decisive to be shamed. And when you explain yourself, you make yourself categorizable, legible, touchable. You reduce your mystique to a PowerPoint of justifications. You stop being feared and start being figured out. And once they've figured you out, you become boring, defeated, finished. Machiavelli believed it was better to be hated as a ruler who commands than loved as one who explains. Because hate is still respect. Hate still leaves people guessing. But explanation? That's surrender in a velvet glove. Let's go even deeper. Explanation is often disguised as transparency. I'm just being honest. I want people to understand me. I want to clear the air. But why? What do you really want? Acceptance, forgiveness, praise, control. You want to influence their perception, but you've chosen the weakest method possible: verbal correction. What you should have done instead was move with such decisiveness, such clarity, such unshakable posture that their perception adjusted itself. The strongest perception control comes not from dialogue, but from pattern. People believe what you consistently show them, not what you say to them. Say you're a strong leader, but hesitate during pressure. They won't believe you. Say nothing, but calmly execute decisions when everyone else is panicking, and you'll never need to explain yourself again. That's the real trick. Live so powerfully that no explanation is ever required. Let them misread you. Let them draw the wrong conclusion. Let them spread whispers. Let them call you harsh, distant, arrogant, ruthless. Because you don't need to defend the label. You need to justify your throne. And thrones aren't defended with speeches. They're defended with force, clarity, and presence. And when people realize that you never respond to their noise, something incredible happens. They start responding to your silence. They wonder what you're thinking. They analyze your every move. They interpret your stillness as calculation. They start trying to stay in your good books, even if they don't know the rules. Because now you've created something explanation can never buy: psychological gravity. The room bends toward you. Not because you yelled, not because you argued, not because you had the best rebuttal, but because you walked in already knowing, I don't need to fix your misunderstanding. You'll fix it yourself or get left behind. That's what Machiavelli lived for. That's what separates rulers from the ruled. That's what keeps your hands on the strings of perception, while everyone else scrambles for clarity. So what does this look like in real life? Let's make it surgical. Someone questions your integrity? Don't send them paragraphs. Let your next decision demonstrate such control that their doubt embarrasses them. Someone accuses you of selfishness? Don't justify. Execute a bold move that elevates everyone without saying a word about the accusation. Someone spreads lies? Don't respond. Instead, elevate your status so far above theirs that their words can't even reach your atmosphere. Someone pushes for answers? Smile. Look them in the eyes and say, I'm not here to explain myself, I'm here to win. Because power is not earned by being understood. It's earned by being unshaken while others drown in their attempts to define you. So here's your new creed, the final Machiavellian rewrite of what most people are terrified to accept. Let them misjudge you. Let them talk. Let them distort your name. But never let them see you flinch. Your image is not yours to explain. It is yours to own. And ownership doesn't speak. It doesn't beg. It doesn't defend. It simply stands, unbothered, unmoving, undeniable. Because when the smoke clears, the words fade, and the noise dies down, the only thing that will remain is this: the man who needed no explanation because his presence already said everything.